A brief introduction and a side note first. We do have someone who is videoing this because I had a couple of people out in the community who wanted to get a copy of what the meeting was all about. And we got the okay with them to do that. He's up here, so you all aren't going to be shown on this. I'm going to step away in a minute, so I'm not going to be on it either. But
The camera moves, Kevin.
yes, it does. Kevin, come join us. Grab some food if you want to, Kevin. Find a place to sit. So just wanted to give you a notice about his recording this. It's merely to send to those people who couldn't be here. They had the flu and wanted to be here tonight. So we made the agreement. Is there anybody who has any concern about that?
I'm not going to record the audience.
Yeah, he's just recording.
Unless they beg me to.
Okay. The other quick bit of business, the restrooms are down this hall right here. If you should need those, snacks are over there, as you've already seen. You'll feel free to go and get whatever you would like to get. Most of you I do know, but for those I don't know very well or don't know me at all, I'm Kathy Carmichael. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in Talbot, private practice on down that direction from here, down in the First Presbyterian. Years ago, as part of my work, I traveled to a national meeting in D.C. and saw a presentation by a man from Minnesota who got me very interested. He was a keynote speaker at that meeting. He got me very interested in this new organization, which at that time I think was called Better Angels. That was its old. Started out Better Angels, taken from a quotation from Abraham Lincoln, I believe.
Yeah.
It has since changed to
Braver
Angels. So that's what we're called now. Anyway, he's the one who introduced that idea to me that I've been thinking about and pondering, as some of my friends here will tell you. I've brought it up multiple times over the years, because it was an organization begun by well-meaning volunteer people who wanted to work at building bridges between people from different perspectives and to try to decrease the level of polarization that was already prevalent. Now, this was some years ago. So I have followed them since then and have found out that most of the states, maybe all of the states, now have an alliance with the national group. Arkansas is one of those states. We're real fortunate to have them. So it seemed like a good time to have this group from Braver Angels, I'm going to call it the right thing, but anyway, Braver Angels / Better Angels. It's been really a good opportunity for us to have them come down and present what they can do within the state to help guide us or give us ideas about bringing people together who have different perspectives. Because if you're like me, you're hearing a lot of that, seeing a lot of that now, and we want to try to understand everybody's perspective if we can. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to them. We have these two men from the state, one from Little Rock. They'll introduce themselves. The other one came from Hot Springs. So they're going to give a presentation to you all on their PowerPoint, and then I think open it for questions too. Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm Glen White, and I am kind of getting out of the role of state co-coordinator. There's our other state co-coordinator, Charles. I've been doing this one way or another since I helped found it back in 2017, and so in Arkansas. So we're going to move right along. Let me tell you this too. You're welcome to ask us questions in the middle. We do have a lot we want to cover, but we also want to be responsive to whatever you want to know. And so we'll just try to do our best. If you have something, we'll answer it and then move on to the next thing. So don't be shy, and if we need to, we'll move things along. So the first thing, just what we're going to cover in the next hour and 15 minutes or whatever, is let you know a little bit about Braver Angels and what we are, what we do, as you heard a little bit there. Tell you a little bit about why polarization is such a big concern, and it is a huge concern. What we do about it in Braver Angels, some of the skills training and other experiences we have that can help with that, and then what you guys can do as individuals or groups. So, as she said, this was started, the National Braver Angels organization was started in 2016 around the time of the election between Hillary and Donald, and the polarization had already reached a pretty high level then, and as you know, it's gotten even worse. But that's when it started, and I got interested early, and then a few of us in the Central Arkansas area were contacted by National saying, hey, you're members of Braver Angels, you want to visit and see what you can do down in Arkansas? So we did, and me and Cindy Kaiser decided a few months later just go ahead and co-found the alliance. We did. So what we try to do in Braver Angels is to reduce political polarization, get people engaged in talking across the divide, because it's not something that's real comfortable to do, and most of us don't want to do it, and it's getting harder and harder to do that, but it's really critical in democracy that we do that. So we also, the other part is this, we want to change the politics in this country, and that means starting to demand of our politicians and the candidates that they be willing to compromise in order to get some things done. So that's a little quick and dirty idea about that, but some of the things that we do, the principle, I want to experiment with moving up here and see how this works. So y'all got a little bit. So one of the things we do is we're always trying to do things that will bring people together rather than things that are divisive, because we've got more than enough of that as it is. So that means being able to reach out to people in other groups and with other views rather than stay in your own groups. You've heard this term bubble, right? You know, so try to get out of your bubble some. One thing that worries a lot of people when they hear about us is like, well, I can't do that because I'm really passionate about the Democrats or the Republicans or whatever. The way we look at it is you don't have to be moderate. You can be as passionate as you want. The key thing is that you have to uphold certain values to be able to be respectful of people on the other side, to be willing to talk and engage in problem solving. So it's values we're after. If you have those values, that's what we're after. We're not after one party or the other or one of the other parties. Mainly, we need people talking because that's the only way we'll find common ground, and it is there if you talk. And then if we find that common ground, we have a chance to actually solve some problems and make some progress on this. So some of the things that we do nationally in Braver Angels, we have skills training workshops where and you'll get a little taste of this toward the end when David covers some of those things, some of the skills that help you if you're wanting to have these difficult conversations but don't want it to go off in the ditch. Experiential workshops, that was actually the first thing that was done in an old red-blue workshop. They got like about 8 or 10 people on each side. This group voted for Hillary, this group voted for Donald. But it was a very structured kind of thing, and they, over the course of 2 days, they did a lot of activities and talking with each other, and at the end, some fast friendships were formed that persist to this day. That's the kind of thing that can happen if you get people to be respectful and talk to each other. There are other things. We've got a debate, a way to do debates. It's not what you normally learn in school or college. It's a parliamentary style. It's structured so that you keep things kind of in the middle of the road and don't go off. Braver Politics is one of our newer initiatives, and that's where you're trying to get with politicians and government officials and candidates to try to get them to commit to this idea of being civil and being willing to compromise and work with the other side where you find common ground. A lot of stuff. There's podcasts, there's film and book discussions and music. There are a lot of things. So if you join, $12 a year, at the national organization, braverangels.org, then it opens up to the members portal. We got lots of things you can look at. But what we really like to do is kind of the local stuff and talk to people and spread the word.
And those civil conversations.
Yeah, civil conversations is something we started doing last year. And in civil conversations, we actually invite people, the public, to a place like this once a month and say, okay, the topic this month is going to be election integrity or whatever it's going to be. And then we have people come in who are willing to commit to the guidelines of staying civil, but talking openly about what they think. And then that's worked out really well too. And we've got one continuing down in Hot Springs, and who knows, if y'all like the way this sounds, that could be something you do here, because it involves people talking across the aisle. So let's get to polarization. Why is it such a problem? Seems like an obvious answer, but there's a lot. When I first started doing this, I started looking, I'm a retired psychologist, and I started looking at the social sciences research literature to find out what I could, and man, it's just, I mean, it's like an octopus, but more arms. Just so many different facets of polarization and dealing with this sort of thing. But some of the things it causes, extreme political polarization really harms societies, and it's harming our country and our society and our government now. One thing we can be sure of is the lost or impaired relationships. Dave and I like to ask this little question. Anybody here tonight, raise your hand if polarization in the last few years has not caused any problems in any of your relationships? Has not yet. If you've not had any problems with relationships because of politics, raise your hand.
Let the record show that no hands were raised.
We had one person raise their hand, and it turns out it was because she only kept to the people that thought about her.
And that's been in about, what, 4 or 5
Yeah.
presentations?
Probably over about 150 people.
Yeah, we've had one person raise their hand.
So, but anyway, the polarization, it results in things like anger, violence. Everybody's seen the anger, and we know violence happens, including, you know, some of the cases where people are mailing bombs or they're sniping at people on the other party with guns. One of the other problems with this, though, is it limits your exposure to the full range of ideas, and this is kind of related to this other notion of the misinformation, disinformation. There's so much of a problem these days at getting accurate information to the media, and social media, and so on. But if you're polarized, you only hear one side of the story. You don't hear the other side, and some of the other side may be nuts, okay? You could probably say that about both sides. But, you know, there are some good ideas everywhere, and you won't hear about them, or you hear an alternate way of looking at something that's reasonable if you hear it, but if you don't hear it, you don't know. So anyway, that's important, and that mis and disinformation is really important, but we don't have time to get too much into that tonight. Here's something, one of the first things I learned that was just amazing to me, and this, some of the influences on polarization. It starts with our brain, and it starts with human nature. Our brains are designed, and they have been developed through evolution, through the millennia, to do a lot of things. Now, we all know about the fight-flight response, right? You know, survival, you know, everything is secondary when it comes to survival. But survival was important back in the early times when it was a dangerous world, and the only way you could survive as humans, because we were weak compared to the other predators. The only way you could manage that is if you got together as groups and cooperated. Then you could survive. Well, what if you do something to anger the group? You get kicked out, and how long do you live? Not long. So over time, our brains have learned to make quick decisions based on adhering to our values and the values of our tribe. It's a very emotionally based thing, and a lot of the decisions we make and the beliefs we have, we don't realize how much of those are based on emotion. They're based on unconscious influences. If we have time, remind me at the end, I'll tell you the story from Jonathan Haidt's book about the elephant and the rider. If you've read that, that's a great one. We'll move on from that. Oh, and the other thing is that if you really want to try to you can't fully overcome this tendency, it's so strong, but you can balance it out by trying to remain rational and fact-based and think things through, but that's slower, it takes time. And even with that, we also know that people who are smart have the ability to rationalize any belief they have. So there's no easy out here. There's a lot of hard work. So tribalism is, I was kind of getting at that earlier, that's why we are social animals like a lot of other creatures. And we have learned to adopt to our group and get along with the group because it's advantageous to us. And and I mentioned the thing about if you got kicked out. Also, if you went over and said, well, I'm going to be friendly, I'm going to go over here, there's a few hills over, there's another tribe who I haven't seen over there, you might get a disease and come back and give it to your group, and everybody dies out. So there are a lot of reasons why we were designed to be tribal and support each other within the group, but with that comes that out-group idea. You know, so the out-group got me plenty of reasons to be worried and fearful and maybe even wipe them out. One psychologist talks about this being the behavioral immune system. You know, like how we have an immune system that helps us recognize when we have foreign organisms that can make us sick, and it rallies the cellular forces to combat that. The brain kind of does the same kind of thing. If you're presented with an idea that's very different or goes counter to what you strongly believe, it's like you don't want to believe it. You know, everything about your brain says, no, that's dangerous. It's as if you were going to die if you believed it. It's not true, but that's the way our brains are operating. Some other influences, I think everybody is pretty aware that media is a big problem these days. Back when I was growing up, you know, I had 3 networks. Later on, PBS came along. But now there's just like everywhere you look, you can't throw a stick without hitting a few members of the media of some sort, or what is called media. Most of them are not adhering to legitimate journalistic standards. So that means it's a misinformation-rich environment. But it also means if you favor 1 or 2 of those, then you're going to pay attention to them and miss out on all the other information that would balance out and make richer the full appreciation of the reality of the situation. And then, of course, with media, emotions rule the day. How many recognize this saying, if it bleeds, it leads? Yeah. Basically saying, you can sell more money and more advertisers to your newscast if you make sure you cover all the big crimes and the gory details. Because that's a survival thing. That's a cue to our brain that's like, ooh, survival is in order here, I gotta pay attention. So, money and fame can really, you know, come your way if you're willing to bend the truth and just base it on emotions. All right, let's move on. How am I doing on time? All right, maybe. Extreme polarization. One of the big problems with this level of polarization we've got now, and it's happened around the world in different countries, and we're seeing it happen now. When people get polarized, the parties don't want the other side to have any wins at all, and there's usually some roughly equal representation, so they're at loggerheads and no one's willing to give because they don't want to give the other side a win, so no one compromises, nothing happens. No problems are solved, no substantive laws that would really help make our lives as citizens better get passed. So that's a big problem, and when people don't compromise and the problems don't get addressed and things get worse, then that's when you start to have problems with democracy. People start losing faith in the democratic form of government. The institutions are starting to not lose faith in them. The citizens overall lose trust that this is going to help, and they get desperate. So when people are desperate and they need some help solving problems, we all tend to be susceptible to a strong-willed authoritarian figure who says some version of, this is a problem, I can fix it for you, vote for me, and I'll take care of it. And by the way, while we're at it, here's how I'm going to take it. It's that group over there that's causing the problem. And of course that appeals to that tribal, primal part of us, but when we get people like that in there, how many of them actually solve the problems? No. They start to collect their forces to do away with the democratic forces because that's not in their best interest if they want to keep and accumulate power. And we've seen this a lot. We've seen it in other countries, we're seeing it here, so it's really important that we move on and get some things done. Anybody here in city or county government that have been to it?
No.
We have one of our leaders who's been in local government for some time off and on.
And I was.
Oh yeah, that's right, you were too, down in Texas. I shouldn't have told you he was from Texas. But anyway,
I got here as quick as I could.
Took him retirement to get there. So City Hall, under siege. This is a slide that this guy provided. It's showing how much of an increasing problem these days we've got, even at the local levels, when people are trying to do governance at the local level, and they're having meetings, public meetings, where there's lots of disruption. There's constant incivility among some members of the public when they come to, talk to the meetings that the public are allowed to attend. Just the overall state of civility is a problem. Even 21% say they've had family members subjected to harassment or threats just because they don't like that local government official and what they're doing. So it's a really serious problem. So in essence, what I'm saying is, this is a clear and present danger to our country and our form of government that we have relied on for a long time. So if we want to do something about it, we've got to do something about polarization, and we've got to start increasing some of the positive values we all harbor, like respect, civility, and that sort of thing. Because if we don't, it works to our competing, the countries that compete with us, some of them in pretty nasty ways. They love it. In fact, there's plenty of evidence. There's really just obvious evidence that the countries like Russia and China and Iran and others have actively, for a number of years now, been working through social media and propaganda and misinformation, disinformation, to split us up. They don't even, and they do it on both sides because they don't care which side wins out. They just want people fighting with each other in this country, because the more we fight and the more we stay distant from each other, the less gets done, the weaker we become, and that's to that other country's advantage. So we need to do something to change that for the better. Or else it's like this. Remember those stories that circle the wagons because they were being attacked? In this case, we were firing inwards. Or as Walt Kelly said, we have met the enemy and he is us. So it's up to each of us, and that's it. So we're doing what we can. You guys are doing. You're taking an important step here by being here tonight, and hopefully you will continue after this to use some of the resources we share with you and kind of do your own thing, whether it's locally or state or national. One of our people that first started with us is doing a lot of stuff with Natural. She does it all by Zoom, except maybe once a year she goes to a conference. But there are plenty of things you can do, and we'll maybe get to that more later. But I want to make this point. For a long time, I thought this way too, and I think most people do. You don't realize how fragile our democracy is. It is much more on the honor system than you realize. If you think about a lot of what has happened in recent years that you never thought would happen, well, you never thought it'd be happening because we've got a constitution, we've got the law, we've got the courts, we've got sanctions and fines and prison. But what really happens if somebody decides they're not going to go along with it and just, go their own way? It's more vulnerable than you realize. So we need to each take responsibility for what we can do. You don't all have to be up here talking to people around the state like me and David. That's fine if you do, but it's not necessary. You need to be a leader in your community. Or maybe you just need to be a leader in your neighborhood, and when you go to the grocery store, by acting respectfully and pleasantly with people, even though they voted for that no good so-and-so. So, final one. Doing pretty good, okay. Some potential solutions. We can do about 2 hours just on this or more, but one of the key things is communicate rather than persuade. Do not expect to change anyone's mind. It's not about that. Don't try to change minds. You're not going to do it. If you do, it's like give you an award, because that's just doesn't happen. Instead, try to have a respectful exchange of information and views, and treat the other person like a human being that you can afford some respect and decency, and hopefully they'll return that. That's the kind of thing that leads to improved relationships. It also combats another bad thing that happens with polarization. That's the tendency to dehumanize the other side. And if you dehumanize people in that other tribe, then all of a sudden it makes it okay to do a lot of things you wouldn't normally think are okay. So if you could get and have a real honest conversation with someone and follow some guidelines, you'd be surprised the doors it opens in that relationship. And part of that then also is being listening. In fact, we should probably have these reversed. It starts with listening. Listening in a certain way. Not listening so you can figure out how you're going to rebut what they just said. That's not listening. Listen with extreme curiosity, saying, I want to understand where they're coming from. Why do they think that way? What led them to this belief? I want to walk in their shoes for a bit and see how they see the world. Doesn't mean you're going to change to the way they see it. You just want to understand them better. Moderate emotions. Remember I talked about the emotions. That's part of the survival, fight, flight response. So if you start getting emotional, that's that other more primitive part of your brain starting to take over a little more. And so to the extent you can possibly do anything to keep the emotional tone at moderate levels and keep yourself in charge of your emotions, then you're more likely to have a positive conversation outcome. Values over tribe. Can you think of any examples of where maybe, let's say, a party or a candidate or politician said, I believe this and this, and then sometime later on, their party has the opposite plan to say, yeah, I believe that. They're not going by their values, they're going by what their tribe says. So another thing I would suggest to you is to go with your values that you have vetted carefully and thought through and you feel confident in. And if your tribe starts going against your values, do your best to try to stick with your value, because it's real tempting to go with the tribe and go along. When we talk to teenagers about peer pressure, right? Happens with adults too. Build relationships. I've kind of talked about why that's so important. And being the leader, just model civility and respect to other people in all walks of life. Okay, isn't that it for me? I believe so, yeah. But, yeah, well, hold on a second.
I may have touched something.
It didn't take much. Okay, so he's about to come up and finish up, but if you have a few questions right now, maybe take 5 minutes. Do you have any?
I have one.
Okay.
Tell me the difference in misinformation and disinformation.
Good question. Misinformation is when you unknowingly pass along some information that's not accurate. You see it, you heard it on Facebook, must be right. Hey, to your friends, did you know this? But you don't know that it's wrong. You just assumed it was right. Disinformation is you know it's wrong and you on purpose pass it along. It's like, I know how I can get these people. I can say this. I know it's a lie, but I want to get them. And then you pass along. And then other people like us read and say, oh, wow, that must be true. And then it's misinformation to us, but it's disinformation to the originator. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I wrote down, does democracy have to be vulnerable to work?
That's a good question.
Does it have to be vulnerable?
Vulnerable, right, because you talked about it being such like a fragile state that we all, like we have to work to keep a democracy. It's like as a society.
I think there are two parts to the question here. You may have some thoughts on that, but one is just human nature means we can't possibly have enough laws and structure in place to guarantee everything. At some point, are you familiar with the notion of a social contract?
Yeah.
The social contract is basically this kind of like, it's not written down, it's just society decided we're going to conduct ourselves this way. This is the way it's normal. We don't agree with people who act outside that set of norms. So it's really like a social contract, and so that's what makes it vulnerable. So I don't think it'd be just democracy, but what do you think, David?
Well, while Glenn was talking, it gave me a minute to think. And off the top of my head and the minute there that I had to think about it, it's a very good question. My initial response, I would say, is that democracy is actually designed to be volatile. Democracy is designed to be constantly changing because the root of democracy is the evolution of the beliefs and desires of the people. Because in democracy, the foundation of everything is what do we want on any given day. And on any given day, we may be prioritizing education. And a week later, we may be prioritizing climate change. And it's the job of the government to respond to our desires at any given time. In addition to that, the interpretation of the Constitution is an ongoing evolutionary process. And so between the ongoing evolution of the Constitution and the interpretation of it, and the constantly changing desires and priorities of the people, that by definition and by design makes democracy volatile. However, it should not be vulnerable because it's like you were talking a minute ago about the difference between misinformation and disinformation. There's a difference between being volatile and being vulnerable. You can be volatile in your actions, but everybody is in agreement that democracy should exist. You know, that we all come together to defend democracy itself. We did that as recently as 24 years ago on 9/11. A week or two after 9/11, the people were voting 90% in support of whatever the president was doing. In 9/11, we were attacked from without, we were attacked from another tribe, and we came together. That's been just in the last 20 years. And now, only 20 years later, we're having to have braver angels.
There's one other thing I would add to that, because you're right, it can be so volatile, people have differing opinions, but I think the founders also set up the three branches of government to compete with each other with the expectation that would slow the process down and keep it kind of within some limits instead of going way out all the time. That'd be my thought.
So we should be, to sum it up, we should be volatile within. We should be volatile within, but we should not be vulnerable without. If that helps. Okay.
Other questions?
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to follow up on what you were saying. I teach the Federalist Papers in class, and Madison talks about the fact that you have to have ambition countering ambition and having the checks and balances so that it forces people to come together and actually come to compromise, and it's a necessary part of it.
Right. Okay, so we're going to keep talking, and we're going to really, quite frankly, we're going to really rush through this tonight. We do presentations where we can do an entire presentation on one of these slides. And so the purpose tonight is to just introduce to you a variety of Braver Angels concepts and recommendations. And if you would like for us to come back in the future and have some more sessions, or even we could do a Zoom session with you or whatever. And if y'all would like to have some more follow-up sessions in the future, we can continue to do that. So this is just sort of an introductory brush through.
We call it Braver Angels 101.
Braver Angels, we won't say Braver Angels for Dummies. We'll call it Braver Angels 101. It was for dummies when we were learning it, but for you it's 101. As Glenn already said, try to build relationships rather than destroy them. As I like to say, and Glenn mentioned, when you have a conversation, instead of trying to persuade the other party, just try to communicate. The goal of any one conversation or of any one communication is not to try to convert the other person. The goal of each individual communication is to leave that other person being willing to have a second communication. That's the real goal of a communication, is to try to end up having the other person want to have another one. And so building relationships, Obviously, if you're building relationships constructively rather than pointing and spitting, then you're reducing conflict. And extensive scientific support about building a relationship rather than being confrontational. If somebody is suicidal and they're on the top of a building about to jump off the building, we don't walk up to them and go ahead, I dare you. We walk up to them and try to start a dialogue and get to know them better and ask them what their problems are, what are your issues, how can I help you with them, and literally talk them off the ledge, okay? And we should basically be doing that in every conversation that we have. This is a story, this guy wrote a book about this. It's this one black man who just decided one night he was just going to go walk into the midst of a KKK rally, and over the course of time, he communicated with, interacted with, developed relationships with members of this KKK group, and over the course of time, he had 200 KKK members give up their sheets by constructive discussion and dialogue. So, promoting democracy. We just said cultivate relationships, cultivate empathy, understanding each other. And George Lakoff says, authoritarians defeat democracy by trying to destroy empathy, which is to some degree where we are now. We're pointing and spitting instead of having empathetic conversations. Their strategies depend on dehumanization, demonizing, and division. One of the best ways to resist is to just one-on-one in your life start cultivating empathy and cooperation with other people. Foster real connections. Develop empathy and foster real connections. One of the ways authoritarian regimes isolate people is by encouraging fear and distrust. Fight or flight, tribalism. Oh, my tribe and those guys over there are bad. Fight back by building strong relationships with your neighbors, friends, and coworkers. Find ways to connect beyond political differences. You may have political differences. This may be the most radical thing that I say all night. Politics should not be your entire life. Beyond politics, first of all, you're all here tonight. You already share the fact that all of you showed up here tonight for some reason. If we had more time, we would be able to just go around the room and ask each person what brought you here individually tonight. And we could start empathizing, communicating, getting to know each other better and what your motivations are. And why are you here? Why do you have desires to start empathizing and building relationships? Y'all should create a network among yourselves here. So constructive, cooperative, finding common ground in ways other than politics. You may agree or disagree on one or two political issues. So what? Maybe you both like Chinese food. Maybe you both like to go to Colorado for vacation in the summer. Maybe you both like opera. Who knows? There are other things to life than whether or not you agree or disagree about abortion. Find those other things and develop a constructive relationship over those. Go out of your way to look for where you agree than going out of your way to look for the one thing that you disagree about. Okay? Share a positive, I just said this. Just start looking more for positive human interactions instead of going out of your way to look for the negative. I know at least 3 people that have told me at different times that the way they start their day, they get up in the morning, they get their cup of coffee, they go to their computer, and they have found between 5 and 10, each of them was different ones, they have found between 5 and 10 people that have Facebook pages that they have decided that these 5 to 10 people are the biggest imbeciles they've ever seen in their life. And they start their day with their cup of coffee and looking up these 5 to 10 people so they can sit at their computer and laugh about them and make fun of them and feel better about themselves because, well, at least I'm smarter than that idiot. That's how they start their day. Stop it. Stop it. Start looking up the Facebooks of other people that vacation in Colorado and learn from them what the best hotels are, the best restaurants, the best hiking trails. Start looking for more positive interactions and communications. Okay? Expectations to abandon. Abandon the expectation that you're going to change the other person's mind. Let me ask you a question. If somebody walked up to you out of the clear blue, pointed their finger in your face, and started yelling and spitting at you that you need to change right now your opinion, let's just pick abortion. How many of you in the next 30 seconds would do that? Hey, you idiot. Everybody knows abortion, blah, 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 blah. How many of you would say, yeah, you're right? Okay? So if you do exactly that to somebody else, what are your chances of success? Stop it. Stop it. Okay? You are not in one 30-second to a minute conversation of pointing and spitting going to convince somebody to change their values or their opinions. What your goal should be, as we said earlier, is to conduct this conversation in such a way and in such a constructive and intelligent and professional way that they might be willing to have a second one. That black man did not walk into the midst of 200 KKKers and have all of them take their robes off in the next 5 minutes.
I doubt that he expected them to.
And he didn't expect them to. Okay. But over time, they did. And he had to build the environment that they were willing to walk that mile with him. Abandon that others will accept your perspectives. And abandon the expectation that by modeling braver angel skills, by modeling civility, by modeling empathy, by modeling being sincerely interested in what the other person has to say, that in that first conversation, they're going to reciprocate that. That's also going to take time. Key guidelines for conversations. Practice respect and civility. Listen with curiosity. Glen emphasized that. The Chinese written symbol for listening includes in it the sub-symbols for ears, eyes, and heart. Which means that listening, at least in Chinese culture, listening involves not only your ears, but your focus, picking up body language, facial expressions, and listening empathetically, there's that word again, and with curiosity with your heart. full contact listening. When you listen to another person, listen to the other person. And at least try to listen for at least one follow-up question that you can ask. Regardless of what they say, regardless of talk about, have a goal, not of cutting them off so that you can go, well, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. But have a goal of listening to what they're really saying so that you can say back to them, well, you know, I agreed with your third point there about climate change. I agreed with you on that. Or, I don't know that I fully followed your second point. Could you elaborate on the second about water pollution? Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I'd like to hear more. Listen closely enough to what they're really saying that you can at least have a follow-up question. Because as much as anything, that tells them you really are listening. I go to grocery stores and I'm checking out with the checker. I go to restaurants and I look at the waitress and I look them right in the eye and I say, how are you today? And 90% of the time, they actually do a double take. And when they focus in on me after they do their double take, you can see on their face, this guy's serious. This guy really wants to know how I am. And unfortunately, sometimes they actually start telling me. But my main point is that people today are so starved, they are so starved for and so unexpecting that somebody really is interested in them, that when somebody does look them in the eye and sincerely say, what do you think? How are you? We don't know how to take that anymore. That has become so alien, we don't know how to respond to it. When you speak, say, I think, rather than say, everybody knows. Okay? Your opinion is not a universal law of the universe. Your opinion is not equivalent to gravity or the speed of light. Okay? And make that distinction. My opinion is not, well, everybody knows except you idiot. Key guidelines. Identify and point out where you do find agreement. You're having this conversation, you're having empathetic back and forth now that you've created this conversation. You are now having empathetic dialogue. Keep listening for where you can agree with the other person and find compromise and points of interest. Acknowledge possible weaknesses in your own side. I'm sure that most of you, and by the way, Braver Angels has seminars where we actually do this. We actually ask people that lean liberal and people that lean conservative to talk about specific points where they do disagree with their own side. And there may be 8 people that, let's say they're the 8 conservatives, and they may each give a different thing about Trump or about the Republican Party platform or whatever that they disagree with. There's 8 Reds, and each one of them has something different about their tribe that they have a problem with. And we have entire sessions that do nothing but that. So point that out. Point out in your conversation. Yeah, I myself even don't like something that our side does. Keep your emotions in check. Be more Captain Kirk, no, be more Spock than Captain Kirk. As Glen said, keep your emotions in check. Tribalism, fight or flight. Oh, I've got to be protected by my tribe or I'm in big trouble. The emotions, try to tamp those down. If you let your emotions get out of control with you, that's when you start pointing and spitting. And you start losing your empathy and your desire to communicate and cooperate. So start developing the ability, breathe deeper, do a little yoga breathing, count to 10, ask the other party another question, let them talk a while, and while they're talking some more, you can try to calm yourself down and get back into a reasonable communication. Avoid name calling and insults, and if the other party name calls and insults you, ignore it and keep talking about the issue itself. When I used to be a manager, I would constantly tell my staff that our conversations are about policies, not personalities. We're going to keep a constant focus on the policies. We're going to keep a constant focus on climate change, on potholes, on the quality of education, not on personal insults and name calling. And do that in your conversations, even if the other party does not. Let the other person know that you truly want to understand. How are you today? So why do you feel as you do about climate change? Sincerely ask that. Sincerely let the other party know you want to understand. Ask them permission to ask them follow-up questions. Acknowledge your political stance. Well, I agree with 2 of your points, but I disagree with 2 others. And again, I said my position. Offer something critical about your side. You know, okay. Oops. I did
There
it
you go again. There.
All right. This is a fundamental, foundational, core concept of Braver Angels, and it basically sort of sums up the other things that we've already talked about. The other recommendations that we made can be summarized in this one screen, and this is one of the screens that I told you that we could do a 30-minute presentation just on this screen. I'll do it in about 3 minutes. LAP skills. And LAP stands for listen, acknowledge, pivot, and perspective. This is a core recommended format for a conversation by Braver Angels. And you can use it in any conversation. Eye to eye, Zoom, emailed, any form of communication, you can learn and start using this format. You begin not by pointing and spitting, but by listening to the other party. If you have to get them started talking by asking them a question, you can do that. Well, how do you feel about climate change? And you listen. You start by listening, and really, truly listening, Chinese listening, not by pointing and spitting. You listen to think of follow-up questions that you can ask. You listen to think of things that you actually agree with them on, and you can tell them that, oh, well, we share these particular views. You start seeking in what they have to say common ground and greater understanding. You acknowledge back to them what they really said. You don't respond to them with an insult. You don't respond to them with name calling. You don't respond to them with twisting and manipulating what they said. We have all become in this society extremely skilled at playing gotcha. We've become very skilled at it. We've learned how to do it from the media. Don't do that. Don't look for some way to twist or manipulate what they said. You are acknowledging what they truly said. That'll also make them blink. When you actually really did listen to what they really said, instead of you trying to pick a fight, that'll also set them back. If you've listened to them first, and then if you have truly acknowledged what they really said, and if you've even asked them follow-up questions because you're acting like you are truly interested in who they are and what their beliefs are, already by that point, just through L and A, you have already established a relationship. Just like I do at the grocery store by looking at the clerk and simply saying, "How are you?" and meaning it. That's all it took, 10 seconds. And that was her most meaningful interaction of that entire day. And I dedicated 10 seconds to it. Then, if you want to share your position, you ask them for permission. That's pivot. And all that the pivot is not giving your position on climate change. The pivot is simply asking them, well, you know, those are really interesting points you made, and I've recently read a couple of articles about climate change, and there was some stuff in those I thought was interesting. Could I share what was in those articles with you? The pivot is only asking the other person if they would like to hear your thoughts. And they may keep yakking and giving more of their view. They don't necessarily have to say sure. And so if they keep talking and don't tell you you can talk yet, then you go back to listening and acknowledging. And at some point when they have to stop and take a breath, you can ask again, can I share about these articles? And you ask that 2 or 3 times. And if they never come around and offer to you the chance for you to enter the conversation, then you may decide it's time to go get a cup of coffee or something. But you ask permission, and then if they do say, sure, tell me about those articles, then you give your perspective. Okay? LAP, L-A-P-P. And like I said, that's foundational to what Braver Angels presents.
I would say that we're not including a lot of things about perspective. There are several skills involved in how you express yourself. Probably a good summary is just here, express your views, but don't say anything that dismisses or discounts theirs. Even if you think they're full of it, you don't do that.
Could you give some examples of that, Glenn, just briefly?
Okay, so like if which part, just the perspective? Okay, well,
Of entering your perspective.
okay, well, and then you said it's okay. Well, my view on climate change is based on a lot of reading I've done. It looks like almost all of the traditional scientists who study this have indicated a lot of rational basis for the fact that the Earth is gradually warming. And then I see things like the storms. They're getting more frequent and greater intensity, and a number of other things. There seem to be so many things happening that, to me, that sounds like pretty strong evidence that there really is some climate change happening. That's kind of the way I'm looking at it. Is that?
Yes, yes, agreed. And another thing that is important in having these interactive conversations that we just have failed so far to say tonight, but Braver Angels highly recommends it, is to include your personal life story and your life experience. I believe the way I do about a given issue partially because of my personal life experience. Let's pick climate change. When I am giving my perspective about climate change, I may say, well, I grew up on a farm in Alaska. And so having grown up on a farm in Alaska, I started seeing that the peak farm season was shifting. it was shifting from May back into April or whatever, but you include your personal life story about how you have become who you have become, and why some of your views are the way they are. And giving your personal life story also builds that personal empathy with the other party. And we have not yet said that.
That's a very good point. I don't know how we managed to miss that in here. Need to add that to it.
Stay focused on the main topic. Don't respond to their baiting questions. Just go back to the issue you're talking about, rather than letting them make it personal. Same thing. Don't return their provocative statements. And finally, ultimately, agree to disagree. And you may even, again, invite them to the second conversation. Well, you know, it looks like we're going to disagree on a few things today. Maybe we can get coffee Friday and we can talk about those. That black man did not give up after his first night at the bonfire. That black man probably went to a lot of bonfires. Okay? He agreed to disagree that first night, and then he came back. Okay? And, okay, the end.
No, it's not. It's just the beginning for you guys. BraveryAngels.org website is good. I joined for $12 a year. You can't get any cheaper than that, right?
That's 2 cups of coffee.
Yeah, but you can donate more than that if you want to. There was a lot more Zoom workshops and debates happening during the pandemic isolation than now, but there's still some going on. Here in Arkansas, it's probably going to have to come up somewhere in Central Arkansas, unless you do something like this and get us a good, strong registration. Maybe come down and do something like that. And then our workshops tend to be more like in the 2 to 4 hour category, depending on what we are. The Red Blue could actually be an entire weekend. And then you can volunteer. We love having volunteers, and in these days, we do all of our meetings by Zoom. So we can take anybody in Arkansas who's interested and wants to help. You can do your stuff down here locally, and then make quarterly meetings with us on Zoom to learn what the rest of us are doing, and we can all work together on doing some things. So we encourage you to volunteer. I've kind of mentioned, we've both mentioned this several times, about there are things you can do in just your normal everyday interactions to try to improve relationships and civility and model it for other people, and then spread the word about us.
You can ask the checker at Walmart, how are they today?
This takes you to our website, arkansas.braveryangels.org. And if you're interested in online conversations, don't start lap skills online over the groups. That's a really bad idea. But you're going to exist in the social media world, many of us. So if you do, I encourage you to go to that Online Skills Training International website and learn a little bit about some strategies that might help you with that. Let me go one more. There you go. So we got the email, we got our state website, the Spot podcast. How many of you I know a couple of you have heard our On the Other Hand podcast. Yeah, I saw a couple of you nod your heads. Yeah. On the other hand, me and April Chatham Carpenter, who was one of my early recruits, and she does mostly national stuff now. She's the chair of the Department of Applied Communications at UA Little Rock. She and I co-host this podcast, and we're in our 3rd year now. We're just about 5 episodes short of 100, with about 30, no, probably more like 40 guests or something. So we try to talk to leaders around Arkansas who do things productively with civility and respect, who work across divisions and things like that, or the occasional subject matter expert or somebody that you just might find interesting. We just finished an interview last week with Philip Martin. For any of you who maybe read the Little Rock paper, you recognize him. We had John Brogan on there. Had Asa Hutchinson right before he dropped out from the last presidential election. So, welcome to check that out too. Contact us, actually, David, with this email.
That email comes to the two of us.
Until I find somebody to take my place.
And I think that information is on that handout. It's on
Yeah,
the front.
yeah, yes, everybody got it.
And our cards are over there too.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any further questions? Yes, sir.
You've talked about one-on-one and how you go about it, how you communicate civility. What do you do about the media? Is there anything can be done about this 24-hour news service that seems to just grow ever worse?
Glen could comment as well. My brief response to that is that what Braver Angels has been doing has not so much been trying to adjust some of the media's behavior, but Braver Angels is sort of promoting public education in teaching the public how to better discern what they see in the media, helping the public better notice misinformation and disinformation, encouraging the public to look at more than one source of information. A lot of people, they just watch one TV news channel, or they just go to one web news service. Braver Angels encourages people to look at three or five. There's a website called All Sides. And this website called All Sides, it'll have a section about an issue, climate change. And then under climate change, it will give paragraphs from a variety of opinions. And so in one place, you can read
The left, center, and the right
variety of perspectives, stuff like that. So Braver Angels is not so much trying to reform the media, but it's attempting to better educate the public in discerning better.
Yeah, you're talking about media literacy there. That's something that goes beyond Braver Angels, but it's something that we really need. You know, in the same way that we all kind of learn growing up, certain things we learn to brush our teeth and use deodorant and all this kind of stuff. It's just basically basic hygiene that we almost all accept as part of our responsibility as, you know, adults. We need the same kind of approach when it comes to media literacy, because media has just taken over the environment so much in this digital age that we really need to have us learning how to be able to discern misinformation versus fact, recognize when we're seeing slanted viewpoints, and learning quality viewpoints and getting a variety out of it. But I'll say this, I'm not one to entirely, totally slam the media, because there are good, there always have been, they're kind of outnumbered now. There are some good people in media still. They practice quality journalism, they follow those ethical standards, but remember, the freedom of the press is a basic constitutional right, because the founders recognize we need people to provide us information. We just need to be able to have some way to encourage facts and reason, and there's limits to what we can do if we have freedom of press and freedom of speech. So probably a lot of us going to wind up working as a society to improve media literacy, so we can handle it that way. Those are my thoughts.
Anything
Good
else?
question.
Anything else? I'll make one last closing comment. I like to tell a story about using lap skills. I had lunch with a guy one day in a restaurant. We're in a restaurant. And he's very, very politically passionate. He likes to talk about politics. He lives politics. He's probably one of those people that you're not going to get him to talk about vacation in Colorado. If you have lunch with him, he's going to yak about politics, and that's it. Okay. So what I did with him at this lunch was, he didn't even know I was in Braver Angels. He didn't know I was in Braver Angels. He knew nothing about Braver Angels, and he certainly had no idea that I formatted our discussion at lunch using lap skills. I just opened up looking across the table over our hamburgers saying, well, what's really concerning you today? And then I just let him go. And then I started asking follow-up questions. Well, tell me more about this. Well, I agree with you on that. Well, you know, I've got a life experience that relates to what you said about that's all I ever did. And over the course of the next hour in this restaurant, while we were having this political conversation, and by the way, we covered primarily two topics. One topic was about corporations being politically active and corporations making political stands and political statements, and whether that was a good idea or not. And then the second question that we went into was, how can we tell when the court system is making a ruling based upon how they truly philosophically feel about the law and the Constitution, and it is their sincere belief that the Constitution says X on a given issue, or are they simply making a politically based opinion because some billionaire gave them a fancy vacation? How can we tell which is which? So those were the two topics that we were talking about for over an hour. And all I was doing, I was just going through lab skills with this guy. And during that hour, we had two sets of people that had been at other tables. As they were getting up to leave from their lunches, they came over to us and walked up to our table and said, well, we just want to tell y'all that we started eavesdropping on you because it was so refreshing to hear people be able to have a civil conversation. Two other tables did that. So that is the potential real world impact of this if just more of us will start doing it.
I want to end with a question for everybody. Anyone care to answer? What do you think you can do after leaving tonight to kind of use what you learned tonight? That assumes you learned anything and won't do anything about it. But if you do, what might be something you can do after this?
And how might you call on us again in the future? Think about both of those things.
Guys, I have a tendency to put the cur in curmudgeon when I'm on Facebook, and a lot of these people know that because they have the misfortune of either following me or stumbling into me. I saw a lot of me in what you guys were talking about. I saw a lot of my friends on the other side in what you were talking about. I've tried the last few weeks since the inauguration to really not take the bait. I'm not always successful, as a lot of my friends know. And I've tried to respond respectfully, and I've tried to respond factually as I understand the facts. And I intend to keep trying to do that, but I have to say it's the most frustrating thing I have encountered besides the spitting and snarling. That's been, and I'm real good at that too, I won't deny that. But I've learned a lot tonight about what I need to do and what I need to work really hard not to do. So thank you, Gracious.
At the end of each day, regardless of others, can you look yourself in the mirror and let that be your goal?
And remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. Because, you know, our brains aren't designed to do really well at the kind of things you're talking about. They're designed to do the other part. So it's an uphill climb. Oh, do you mind if I take 1 minute to tell you that story I was telling you about? Okay, Elephant, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, highly recommended. So he says, he's talking about the brain and stuff in politics. So the brain, when it comes to your beliefs in politics, is like an elephant with a rider on it.
The elephant represents the unconscious, emotional, tribal stuff that actually influences a lot of what we think. Now, you might think if the elephant is walking along and it goes this way, the rider steered it. No. In this case, it's the elephant with all those unconscious emotional things that makes the decision about the belief to adopt or a decision to make or a candidate to vote for. The rider's job, that's like the smart part of the brain that's not always in charge. The rider's job is to make up a rationalization as to why the elephant turned that way. That's the way the brain works. So we got to give a little more help for that rider. It can be done, but it's always an uphill climb. If you really want to get into it, Nobel Prize winning economist and psychologist Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize because of some of the early research and figuring out that many of our decisions that we make are not because we are rational people and figure it out, it's best for us, it's all that other stuff. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for coming. Yes, ma'am.